I'm Olivia, 28 female. I live in a city apartment that I'm proud to have secured on my own, working a demanding but rewarding job as a forensic accountant. It's a quiet life, one built on order, logic, and the satisfying certainty of numbers that always, eventually, add up. My life is a carefully constructed fortress against the chaos I grew up with, a chaos disguised as perfection. This is the story of how a single dollar bill, meant as a joke, became the catalyst that brought my family's carefully crafted facade crashing down around them, forcing them to repay a debt they never thought I'd be smart enough to calculate. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. To any outsider, my family was the epitome of suburban success. My father, Mark, was a respected financial advisor, a man who built his career on managing other people's futures. He had a firm handshake, a confident smile, and a portfolio of clients who swore by his wisdom. My mother, Eleanor, was an interior designer with impeccable taste. Our house was her showroom, a testament to her ability to create spaces that were both elegant and inviting, featured twice in local lifestyle magazines. She chaired charity committees, hosted the most sought-after dinner parties, and never had a hair out of place. They were a power couple, a perfect team. Then there was my older brother, Ethan. 3 years my senior, Ethan was the golden child. He was charismatic, effortlessly popular, and possessed the kind of easy confidence that seemed to make everything he touched turn to gold. While I was quiet and studious, Ethan was the star athlete, the debate team captain, and now the founder of a flashy tech startup that was, according to him, disrupting the industry. My parents adored him. They invested in his dreams, both financially and emotionally, celebrating his every minor victory as if he'd just won a Nobel Prize. His face was plastered all over their social media, his achievements the centerpiece of every family newsletter. And me, I was Olivia, the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who got good grades, followed the rules, and never caused any trouble. I was the sturdy, unremarkable foundation upon which the more glamorous parts of the family were built. My profession as a forensic accountant was a source of mild confusion for them. It wasn't glamorous like my mother's work or high stakes like my father's. "So, you just look at spreadsheets all day?" my mother would ask, her nose wrinkling slightly. How quaint. My father would try to be more diplomatic. "It's a stable career, Olivia, very practical." Practical was their code word for boring. Ethan was even more direct. "Numbers nerd," he'd laugh, ruffling my hair even though I was a grown woman. "Still playing with your calculator, Liv." I learned early on to carve out my own space, to find satisfaction not in their approval, but in the clean, irrefutable logic of my work. While Ethan was out chasing venture capital, I was tracing stolen funds through complex webs of shell corporations. While my mother was choosing fabric swatches, I was preparing evidence that would put white-collar criminals behind bars. I found my value in the truth, in the unwavering reality that numbers don't lie. People do. Our family gatherings were perfectly choreographed events. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, they were all opportunities for my mother to showcase her hosting skills and for my father to hold court. The table was always exquisitely set, the food catered from the best restaurant in town, and the conversation light and breezy, never delving into anything too real or uncomfortable. It was all about maintaining the image. We were the happy, successful family everyone wanted to be. The dynamic was always the same. My father would tell a story about a brilliant investment he'd made. My mother would talk about her latest high-profile client. Ethan would boast about a new feature his app was launching, using buzzwords that nobody understood but everyone nodded at impressively. I would be asked a perfunctory question about my job, and before I could give a real answer, the conversation would pivot back to Ethan. "That reminds me," my dad would say, "Ethan, tell your mother about the article that was written about you." I tried not to let it bother me. I told myself that this was just how it was. They loved me in their own way, they just didn't understand me. But over the years, their casual dismissiveness began to feel less like a misunderstanding and more like a deliberate choice. There were small things, little cuts that added up over time. They forgot my graduation from my master's program because it clashed with a weekend trip Ethan had planned. They loaned Ethan the down payment for his first condo, but told me I needed to end the value of saving on my own when I was looking for my first apartment. They called his student loans an investment in his future, and mine a personal responsibility. Each instance was explained away with such plausible deniability that I felt crazy for even being upset. "Oh, Olivia, you're so sensitive," my mother would say with a sigh. "We just had so much going on that weekend." Or, "Ethan needed the help more, his industry is so competitive. You have a safe government job." It wasn't a government job, but correcting them was pointless. They saw what they wanted to see. They saw Ethan as a shining star who needed fueling and me as a dependable candle that could just burn on its own, unnoticed in the corner. My Aunt Clara, my mother's younger sister, was my only real ally. A university professor with a sharp mind and an even sharper wit, Clara saw right through the facade. "They're performing, sweetie," she told me once over coffee. "Your mother and father have spent 30 years building this stage, and they can't bear the thought of anyone missing their lines." She was the one who encouraged my interest in accounting, who bought me my first book on financial forensics. "You have a mind for patterns, for finding the truth beneath the surface," she'd said. "Don't ever let them make you feel that's not a superpower." So I built my life apart from them, visiting on holidays and for obligatory birthday dinners, playing my part as the quiet, unassuming daughter. I smiled at their backhanded compliments, nodded along to Ethan's monologues, and kept my achievements to myself because sharing them felt like feeding a void. I had my own friends, my own career, my own life. I thought that was enough. I thought I had made my peace with my role in the family. I had no idea that my 28th birthday would be the day the performance finally ended, and the carefully constructed stage would come crashing down. The day that a single dollar bill would ignite a fire in me I never knew I had. The reservation was at Aria, the kind of restaurant where the waiters wear white gloves and the water glasses are never less than half full. It was my mother's choice, of course. For my 28th birthday, she wanted a venue that reflected her status. It didn't matter that I would have preferred a quiet evening at my favorite low-key Italian place. Birthdays in our family were public relations events. I arrived right on time, wearing a simple but elegant navy dress that I'd bought for the occasion. My mother greeted me with air kisses, her eyes scanning my outfit with a critical glance before she declared it perfectly adequate. My father gave me a hearty slap on the back, and Ethan, already on his second glass of expensive wine, grinned and said, "Look who it is, the birthday girl. Don't worry, Liv, 28 is the new 18. He thought he was being charming. The dinner was, as always, a performance. My father regaled the table with a story about a stock tip that had made one of his clients a small fortune. My mother critiqued the restaurant's decor, loud enough for the staff to hear. Ethan talked endlessly about a potential merger, using words like synergy and vertical integration as he checked his phone every 5 minutes. I sat and listened, offering the occasional smile or nod, feeling more like an audience member than the guest of honor. My Aunt Clara, seated next to me, would occasionally catch my eye and give me a small, sympathetic smile. She knew the drill. After the main course, my father cleared his throat, tapping his glass with a fork. "All right, everyone, time for presents for the birthday girl." This was the climax of the show. Gift-giving was a competitive sport in our family. My mother presented me with a silk scarf from a brand I couldn't afford and would never wear. It was beautiful, but it wasn't me. It was for the daughter she wished she had. Ethan handed me a small, heavy box. Inside was a high-tech smart water bottle that tracked your hydration levels and sent notifications to your phone. "It's from my company's new wellness line," he announced proudly. "Retail price is $200. You're welcome." Then it was my parents' turn. My mother reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a crisp, cream-colored envelope with my name written on it in her perfect calligraphy. "Now, Olivia," she said, her voice dripping with theatrical sweetness, Your father, and I know how practical you are. You're always so focused on saving and being responsible. So we got you something we know you'll appreciate." A murmur of anticipation went around the table. My father was beaming, playing along. I took the envelope, a genuine sense of curiosity piqued. For years, they had given me practical gifts, a contribution to my retirement fund, a high-quality set of professional work clothes. While they lacked personal touch, they were undeniably useful. I expected a check, perhaps a significant one, to help with the down payment on the condo I'd been saving for. I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out the card. It was a generic birthday card with a picture of a kitten on the front. Inside, above their signatures, was a single, crisp $1 bill, neatly taped to the paper. I stared at it, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. $1? This had to be a joke, a lead-in to the real gift. Then my mother delivered the punchline. She leaned forward, a smug, glittering smile on her face, and said in a voice loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, "Don't spend it all in one place, sweetheart." For a split second, there was silence. My mind went blank, and then the laughter started. It wasn't just a chuckle, it was a roar. Ethan threw his head back and howled, slapping the table. My father was laughing so hard his face turned red. Even a couple at the next table who had overheard were snickering. They all thought it was the funniest thing they had ever heard. The practical, money-obsessed accountant daughter getting a single dollar. Hysterical. But I wasn't laughing, I was frozen. The heat of humiliation washed over me in a sickening wave. My face felt hot, my hands cold. I looked from my mother's triumphant smirk to my father's tear-streaked face to my brother's mocking grin. This wasn't a harmless joke. This was a statement. This was what they thought of me. My entire life, my career, my careful planning and fiscal responsibility, it was all just a joke to them. I was a punchline. In that moment, every small slight, every forgotten achievement, every backhanded compliment coalesced into a single, blinding point of clarity. They didn't just misunderstand me. They held me in contempt. My responsible nature wasn't something they admired, it was something they mocked. My hard work wasn't a source of pride for them, it was a source of amusement. Aunt Clara's face was a mask of cold fury. She was the only one not laughing. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch grounding me. "Eleanor, that was cruel," she said, her voice low and sharp. My mother waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, lighten up, Clara. Olivia can take a joke. Can't you, sweetie?" She looked at me, her smile faltering slightly as she saw the look on my face. Something inside me snapped. The years of quiet acceptance, of biting my tongue and forcing a smile, evaporated. The forensic accountant in my brain, the part of me that sees patterns and calculates discrepancies, suddenly kicked into overdrive. While my heart was splintering from the humiliation, my mind was already running numbers. The down payment they loaned Ethan. The tuition fees they paid for his entrepreneurial summer programs. The car they bought him for his college graduation. The thousands of dollars they'd poured into his life, while telling me to be self-sufficient. My mind flashed to a conversation I'd overheard years ago, something my father said to a friend on the phone about my college fund. "We had to liquidate some of it for a business emergency. Olivia will be fine, she'll get scholarships." I had gotten scholarships and I had taken out loans. I had worked 2 jobs through university. At the time, I had accepted their story, a business emergency. It sounded so plausible. But now, in the glare of their open mockery, the story felt thin, transparent. I looked down at the dollar bill taped inside the card. $1. They were about to find out just how much that dollar would cost them. My expression must have changed because the laughter at the table began to die down. My mother's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. I carefully folded the card, tucked the dollar bill inside, and placed it in my purse. I didn't say a word. I took a sip of water, my hand perfectly steady. The hurt was still there, a cold, hard knot in my chest, but it was now overlaid with something else, ice-cold, calculating rage. The kind of rage that doesn't scream, but plans. The kind of rage that audits. "Thank you for the gift," I said, my voice eerily calm. "It's very memorable." I looked each of them in the eye, my mother, my father, my brother. "And thank you for dinner. It's been incredibly clarifying. With that, I stood up, placed my napkin on the table, and walked out of the restaurant without looking back, leaving them in a stunned, uncomfortable silence. The performance was over. It was time to look at the books. The drive home from the restaurant was a blur. I remember the city lights smearing across my windshield, the hum of the engine, and the chillingly calm voice in my head that kept repeating, clarifying. That's what the night had been. It wasn't just an insult, it was an illumination. It cast a harsh, fluorescent light on the dark corners of my family's dynamics, corners I had instinctively avoided looking into for years. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. Instead, I walked over to the filing cabinet where I keep my important documents. My movements were precise, automatic. I felt like I was at work, stepping into the methodical mindset of a forensic accountant about to start a new case. The client, in this instance, was the younger, more trusting version of myself. The subjects of the investigation were my own family. I pulled out a thick folder labeled University Finances. Inside were copies of my student loan agreements, tuition statements, and records of the scholarships I had earned through sheer hard work. I had always been proud of that folder. It represented my independence, my ability to put myself through a demanding program. My parents had always framed it that way. Olivia is so resourceful, my mother would tell her friends. She managed her entire education herself. Now that narrative felt like a lie. I remembered that snippet of conversation I'd overheard years ago, my father mentioning a business emergency and the liquidation of my college fund. I had been 16 at the time, and the words had gone over my head. But a forensic accountant's mind is a steel trap for financial terminology. Liquidate was a specific word. It meant assets had been sold. My assets. The first crack in the facade appeared in the form of a faded bank statement from over a decade ago. It was for a Uniform Transfers to Minors Act, UTMA, account. My grandfather, my mother's father, had set one up for me and one for Ethan when we were born. He was a frugal, sensible man who believed in the power of compound interest. He'd seeded each account with $10,000, and from what Aunt Clara had told me, he'd made regular contributions until he passed away when I was 10. The account was supposed to be mine, untouchable by my parents except for my benefit and well-being, with the funds transferring to my full control at age 21. I remembered asking my father about it when I turned 21. He'd been vague, dismissive. "Oh, that old thing," he'd said, waving his hand. "The market took a huge hit in '08, Olivia, and your grandfather's investments weren't as solid as he thought. By the time we paid the account management fees and taxes, there wasn't much left. We used what little remained for your high school tutoring and your trip to France with the school." It had sounded plausible. I was young, I trusted him. He was a financial advisor, after all. He wouldn't lie about something like that. But now, I was an adult who specialized in untangling financial lies. I looked at the old statement I had somehow kept. It showed a balance of just over $55,000 when I was 15. A year later, another statement I found tucked away showed a balance of $2,000. There was a single, massive withdrawal for $53,000. The date of the withdrawal was just 2 weeks before my parents put a massive new extension on their house. A sunroom my mother had desperately wanted. My blood ran cold. A business emergency. Tutoring, the trip to France. The numbers didn't add up, not even close. The school trip had cost $3,000, which I had believed came from their regular savings. Tutoring couldn't have cost more than a few thousand over the years. Where had the other $50,000 gone? I stared at the withdrawal slip, my professional brain taking over from my shocked, wounded heart. My father, Mark, was the custodian of the account. His signature was at the bottom, the reason listed for the withdrawal, educational and living expenses. A conveniently vague category. This was the crack. This was the loose thread that I knew, if I pulled it, would unravel everything. My phone buzzed. It was Aunt Clara. I answered, my voice steadier than I expected. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone laced with concern. "I'm fine," I said, and to my surprise, I meant it. Clara, can I ask you something about Grandpa's UTMA accounts? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I was wondering when you might ask about that, she said softly. What do you need to know? Did he set up the same for Ethan? Exactly the same, she confirmed. $10,000 each, with identical contributions until Dad passed. He was very fair about that. Why? Dad told me the account was mostly wiped out by the 2008 crash and fees. He said what was left was used for school expenses. Clara let out a short, bitter laugh. The crash was in 2008. Your grandfather's portfolio was conservative. It recovered by 2010, and your father withdrew that money in 2012. He told me it was a short-term loan for his business that he planned to pay back with interest before you ever needed it for college. I told him it was illegal and immoral. He told me I didn't understand the pressures he was under. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. It wasn't a business emergency. It wasn't for my education. It was for a sunroom. It was to fund their lifestyle. And then there was Ethan. What about his account? What about Ethan's account? I asked, my voice GHT. As far as I know, they never touched it, Clara said. In fact, I'm pretty sure they used it as the seed money for that first ridiculous app idea he had after college. They called it an investment. The hypocrisy was staggering. They had drained my trust fund, my inheritance from my grandfather, to build a fancier house, and then lied to my face about it for more than a decade. Meanwhile, they had handed my brother his inheritance on a silver platter to fund a vanity project. They hadn't just taken my money, they had stolen my opportunities while simultaneously funding his, all while lecturing me on the importance of self-sufficiency. The rage was back, but it was different now. It was no longer a hot, emotional flush of humiliation. It was a cold, hard certainty. I was a forensic accountant. My job was to follow the money, to expose fraud, to bring the truth to light. The skills I had honed chasing down corporate criminals were about to be put to a very different, very personal use. Thank you, Clara, I said. You've confirmed what I needed to know. I have to go now. I have some work to do. Olivia, she said, her voice gentle, be careful. Don't worry, I replied, looking at the incriminating bank statement in my hand. I'm not the one who needs to be careful anymore. I hung up the phone and opened my laptop. I created a new, password-protected folder on my secure drive. I named it Project Repayment. The investigation had officially begun. For the next 4 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was Olivia, the diligent forensic accountant at a top firm, meticulously combing through financial records to find evidence of embezzlement and fraud for my clients. By night, I was Olivia, the vengeful daughter, applying the very same skills to the tangled and deceptive finances of my own family. My apartment transformed into a war room. The dining table was covered in neat stacks of paper, my whiteboard filled with timelines and flowcharts, and my laptop was a portal into a past I was only just beginning to understand. Getting the records was the first hurdle. As my father was the custodian of my UTMA account, he would have received all the historical statements. I knew asking him directly was out of the question. It would tip him off, and he would have every opportunity to hide or destroy evidence. I needed another way. Leveraging my professional knowledge, I contacted the brokerage firm that had held the account. I explained that I was the beneficiary of the UTMA, now well past the age of termination, and required a complete history of the account for my personal financial planning. After providing several forms of identification and a notarized letter, they agreed. A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a complete record of every transaction, every deposit, every withdrawal, every trade, from the day my grandfather opened the account to the day it was emptied. The documents told a story of betrayal in black and white. The account had not been wiped out by the 2008 crash. As Aunt Clara suspected, it had dipped but recovered robustly. By mid-2012, it was worth nearly $60,000. And then there it was, the single withdrawal of $53,000 signed by my father. The money had been transferred to his personal joint account with my mother. 2 weeks after that, records from the county clerk's office, which are public information, showed they paid a contractor $48,000 for a home renovation and extension. The sunroom. They had stolen my inheritance to build a room for their house, a room where my mother hosted parties and bragged about their good fortune. But the UTMA account was just the beginning. It was the inciting incident, the one that opened my eyes. Now I wondered, if they could lie about this, what else were they lying about? My investigation deepened. I started with loans they had given to Ethan. My parents were always boasting about how they supported his entrepreneurial spirit. I started digging into public records, cross-referencing dates, and using the subtle art of social engineering, something I'd learned from a former FBI agent who consulted at my firm. I called Ethan under the guise of wanting to invest a small amount of money into his latest venture. "I've been saving up, and I really believe in you," I said, laying the praise on thick. His ego, predictable as ever, swelled. He was more than happy to talk, to brag. "Yeah, Mom and Dad were my first investors," he boasted. "They gave me $100,000 to get my first app off the ground, said it was my inheritance coming a little early." $100,000. My blood boiled, but I kept my voice sweet. "Wow, that's amazing, Ethan. I'm so proud of you." I made my excuses and hung up, my hand clenched into a fist. They had given him a 6-figure, early inheritance, while my own had been stolen and repackaged to me as a lesson in fiscal responsibility. The deceit ran deeper than I could have imagined. I started looking into my father's business. He owned a small, independent financial advisory firm. It was his pride and joy. Using publicly available information and business databases I had access to through my work, I started to paint a picture of its financial health. It wasn't as rosy as he claimed. I discovered a series of liens against the business over the years for unpaid taxes. They were always paid off eventually, but the pattern suggested periods of serious cash flow problems. One particular lien, for a substantial amount, coincided with another family event. The year they bought me my first car for my 17th birthday. It wasn't a fancy car, just a reliable, used sedan. They had made a huge deal about it, telling me how they had saved up to give me this gift, a symbol of their love and support. "We want you to be safe and independent, Olivia," my father had said, handing me the keys. Now a dark suspicion began to form in my mind. I remembered being asked to sign a pile of papers at the time. My father had rushed me through it, saying it was just standard DMV and insurance stuff. I was young and trusted him implicitly. I barely glanced at what I was signing. Using a record search service, I pulled the title history for that vehicle. My heart sank. The car hadn't been bought with their savings. It had been financed. And the loan wasn't in their name. It was in mine. They had used my personal information, my perfect credit score even as a teenager, to secure a loan. They had made the monthly payments, so it never raised a red flag on my credit report. But they had saddled their teenage daughter with a debt without her knowledge or consent. Why? Because their business was struggling and their own credit was likely stretched to its limit. They couldn't get the loan themselves, so they used me. The gift wasn't a gift at all. It was an act of identity fraud. Every discovery was a fresh wound, a new layer of betrayal. The money was one thing, but the calculated, long-term deception was what truly staggered me. My entire life, they had been crafting a narrative of the responsible, self-sufficient daughter and the brilliant, deserving son. But it was a fiction they had created to justify their own financial mismanagement and blatant favoritism. They hadn't just neglected me. They had actively used me, my name, and my money as a resource to be exploited while simultaneously building up my brother. I documented everything with meticulous care. Every bank statement, every public record, every timeline was cross-referenced and annotated. I created a spreadsheet that would become the centerpiece of my plan. I listed every financial transgression, every stolen dollar, every fraudulent loan. Then, I began to calculate. I wasn't just going to calculate the principal amounts they had taken. As a forensic accountant, I knew the real cost included more than that. I calculated the opportunity cost, what my UTMA account would have been worth if it had been left to grow, invested conservatively in the market for the last decade. The number was staggering, far more than the initial $53,000. I added the value of the fraudulent car loan. I researched the penalties for improper use of UTMA funds and for identity fraud. The final number on my spreadsheet was precise, damning, and backed by a mountain of irrefutable evidence. It was the sum total of their deceit, and it was the exact amount I was going to get back. The laughing had stopped. The audit was nearly complete. All that was left was to prepare my report and present it. The spreadsheet was my masterpiece. I named the file the Mark and a Leaner Ledger, a professional, dispassionate title for a document simmering with years of suppressed anger and meticulously calculated justice. It wasn't just a list of grievances. It was a formal, undeniable audit of their parental financial conduct, complete with exhibits, annotations, and projected interest calculations. This was my home turf. They had mocked my profession, calling it quaint and boring. Now, they were about to see exactly what a forensic accountant could do. The ledger had 3 main sections. Section A was titled Misappropriation of Trust Funds, UTMA Account Hash. This was the core of the case. I listed the initial value of the account, its growth over the years, and the final balance before the illegal withdrawal. Exhibit A1 was a copy of the brokerage statement showing the $53,000 transfer to their personal account. Exhibit A2 was the public record of the payment to the home contractor for their sunroom. The crown jewel of this section, however, was the calculation of damages. I didn't just ask for the $53,000 back. I calculated what that sum, invested in a simple S&P 500 index fund from that date in 2012 until the present day, would have grown to. Compound interest, the very principle my grandfather had believed in, had turned that $53,000 into just over $215,000. I included a detailed chart showing the year-over-year growth, citing historical market data. Beneath the total, I added a legal note on the fiduciary duty of a UTMA custodian and the penalties for its breach. Section B was fraudulent debt origination, 2011 sedan. Here, I detailed the car loan they had taken out in my name. Exhibit B1 was a copy of the loan agreement with my forged or coerced signature. Exhibit B2 was my credit report from that time, showing the inquiry I had never authorized. I calculated the total principal and interest paid on that loan over its 5-year term. While they had made the payments, the act itself was a form of identity fraud. In this section, I didn't just demand the monetary value. I included a summary of the state and federal laws regarding identity fraud and credit application fraud, highlighting the potential criminal and civil penalties, which included fines and, in serious cases, imprisonment. This wasn't about getting money back. It was about leverage. It was about showing them I knew the full extent of their crime. Section C was the most complex, and in many ways the most painful. I called it discretionary investment disparity analysis. O versus E, this was where I quantified the favoritism. I started with Ethan's early inheritance of $100,000. Exhibit C1 was my transcript of his boastful phone call. While this was anecdotal, it was powerful when combined with the other evidence. I then documented every other significant financial contribution I could verify they had made to him, paying off his substantial student loans, the down payment for his condo, and seed money for his various failed startups before his current one. I contrasted this with their contributions to me: 0. I wasn't demanding they give me what they gave Ethan. Instead, I used this section to construct a narrative, to strip away any defense they might have that their actions were a one-time mistake or a desperate measure. It demonstrated a clear, long-term pattern of financial and emotional investment in my brother at my direct expense. It was the why that backed up the what and how of the other sections. Once the ledger was complete, I began to assemble the presentation package. I wasn't just going to email them a spreadsheet. This needed to be a formal, shocking, and undeniable confrontation. I printed every document, every exhibit, and compiled them into 2 professional-grade binders with custom covers, one for each of my parents. The cover simply read, "A financial review prepared by Olivia last name." My final step was to prepare a cover letter that would serve as my opening statement. I wrote and rewrote it dozens of times, stripping away every ounce of emotion until it was as cold and clinical as a legal notice. It began. Dear Mark and Alina, enclosed you will find a detailed audit of financial activities pertaining to my person, conducted from the period of my childhood to the present day. This review was prompted by the events of my 28th birthday dinner, which provided the necessary clarification to investigate long-held discrepancies. This binder contains irrefutable evidence of misappropriated trust funds, fraudulent use of my personal information to secure debt, and a significant, quantifiable disparity in financial support. The total sum owed, including principal, opportunity cost damages, and other identified funds, comes to $267,450.22. The letter went on to give a brief, emotionless summary of each section, referencing the exhibits in the binder. It concluded with my terms. They had 2 options. Option A was to agree to a private settlement. They would sign a legally binding agreement, drafted by a lawyer of my choosing, to repay the full amount over a specified period. In return, I would agree not to pursue legal action, either civil or criminal. Option B was simple. I would take my evidence to the authorities. I would file a civil suit for the recovery of the UTMA funds, and I would file a police report for identity fraud. I would also forward a copy of my findings to the state licensing board that governed financial advisors, as fiduciary misconduct and fraud would almost certainly result in the revocation of my father's license, effectively ending his career. I gave them a deadline, 1 week to review the documents and inform me of their choice. With the binders complete and the letters printed on high-quality paper, I sealed everything in 2 large courier envelopes. There would be no dramatic family meeting, no shouting match. That would give them an opportunity to gaslight, to manipulate, to turn it into a melodrama. This was not a family dispute. This was a debt collection. I arranged for a professional courier service to deliver the packages to their home the next morning, requiring a signature upon receipt. As I sealed the envelopes, a strange sense of calm settled over me. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming my own story. They had spent my entire life writing a narrative for me, the boring, practical daughter who didn't need or deserve their investment. With these binders, I was handing them a new story, one I had written. And this one was backed by evidence. This one was true. The packages were delivered at 9:15 a.m. on a Tuesday. I knew this because I had paid for a tracking service that notified me the moment my mother signed for them. The silence that followed was deafening. For 2 full days, my phone remained silent. No angry calls, no panic texts. It was a silence thick with denial and fear. I imagined them opening the envelopes, the initial confusion turning to disbelief, and then to horror as they turned the pages. I pictured my father, the financial professional, seeing his own crimes laid out with the cold, irrefutable precision he was supposed to apply to his clients' accounts. I imagined my mother, the queen of appearances, realizing that the perfect family image she had curated for decades was about to be shattered. The first crack came on Thursday afternoon. It was a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Olivia, it's Ethan." His voice was strained, the usual arrogant swagger completely gone. "What is this? What have you done? Mom is a wreck, and Dad won't come out of his office." "I sent them a financial review," I said calmly. "It's a professional document. I'm sure Dad, as a financial advisor, can understand it perfectly." "A financial review? Liv, this is insane. It's a binder full of accusations. You're threatening them," he sputtered. "Mom said you're accusing them of stealing from you, after everything they've done for us." "They did steal from me, Ethan," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "And everything they've done, for use seems to have been disproportionately weighted in your favor, using funds that weren't theirs to give. Did you know the seed money for your first app likely came from my college fund? There was a stunned silence on the other end. That's not true, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's all in the binder, with evidence. You should ask Dad to show it to you. This doesn't concern you directly, Ethan, unless you want to be called as a witness in a fraud case. I suggest you stay out of it. I hung up before he could respond. The next call came an hour later. It was my mother. She was crying, the hysterical, performative sobs she used when she wasn't getting her way. "Olivia, how could you?" she wailed. "Your father and I, we gave you everything. We love you. This is a terrible misunderstanding. You've twisted things." "There is no misunderstanding, Mom," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "There are only transactions, dates, and signatures. Numbers don't have emotions. They don't twist things. They just state facts. The fact is, you and Dad took over $200,000 from me, committed fraud in my name, and lied to me about it for my entire adult life." "But the sunroom," she cried, inadvertently admitting it. "We needed it. Your father's business was struggling. We were trying to protect you from the stress, and we gave you a wonderful life." "You didn't protect me. You used me as an undeclared line of credit," I countered. "You built your wonderful life on my grandfather's legacy and my future. You have until Tuesday to give me your answer. Option A or option B, I suggest you discuss it with Dad." I ended the call. The final reckoning, I knew, would have to be with my father. He was the one who signed the papers, the one who understood the legal and professional lines he had crossed. He called on Friday evening. His voice was low, defeated. There was no yelling, no denial. He had seen the evidence. He knew he was caught. "Olivia," he began, his voice raspy, "I've reviewed your document." "My audit," I corrected him. "Yes, your audit," he conceded. "Some of your conclusions, the opportunity cost, it's aggressive." "It's standard," I replied. "It's the methodology I would use for any corporate client who had funds embezzled by a fiduciary. I'm extending you the same professional courtesy." He was quiet for a long moment. I could hear the weight of his career, his reputation, and his freedom hanging in the balance. He knew I had him. The UTMA misappropriation was bad enough, but the identity fraud for the car loan was a clear-cut crime. A complaint to the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA, would be the end of him. "What do you want, Olivia?" he finally asked, the question heavy with resignation. "I want what I am owed," I said simply. "I want the $267,450.22. I want a legally binding repayment plan, and I want it to start immediately. That's option A. Option B is you can explain your accounting practices to a judge and the FINRA board." "We don't have that kind of money just sitting around," he said, his voice cracking. "We'd have to sell the house." "The house you renovated." "With my trust fund? That sounds appropriate," I said, feeling not a shred of pity. "Or you could take out a loan. Perhaps you could put the sunroom up as collateral, or maybe Ethan could give you back the early inheritance you gave him. How you get the money is your problem. My problem was you taking it. I'm just correcting a long overdue accounting error." This was the man who had laughed in my face over a $1 gift. This was the financial advisor who had lectured me my whole life on fiscal prudence while stealing from his own child. My sympathy had been burned out of me in the heat of that public humiliation. "You would do that," he whispered. "You would destroy your own family." "You're mistaken," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You destroyed this family a long time ago with your lies and your greed. I'm just the accountant who finally balanced the books. You have until Tuesday at 5 p.m. to get back to me with your decision. Have your lawyer contact me to arrange the details for option A. If I don't hear from you, I will proceed with option B on Wednesday morning." I hung up the phone. There was no satisfaction, no joy, just a profound, quiet sense of resolution. The confrontation wasn't a dramatic, movie-like scene. It was a quiet, clinical execution of a well-laid plan, backed by undeniable facts. They had left me no choice but to treat them not as family, but as subjects of a fraud investigation. And now, the investigation was over. The power was, for the first time in my life, entirely in my hands. The final reckoning had arrived, not with a bang, but with the quiet, inescapable finality of a ledger. The deadline came and went. At 4:58 p.m. on Tuesday, 2 minutes before my ultimatum expired, an email landed in my inbox. It was from a lawyer whose name I recognized from a prominent local firm. The subject line was Ray, M and E last name, /O last name, financial settlement. The email was brief and to the point. His clients, Mark and Alina, had agreed to the terms of option A. They would enter into a private settlement agreement to repay the full amount of $267,450.22. They requested that my legal counsel forward the proposed agreement to his office for review. I read the email twice, then leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for my entire life. It was over. I had won. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal paperwork. I hired a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer who specialized in financial disputes. She drafted an ironclad agreement that included a strict repayment schedule, interest penalties for late payments, and a non-disparagement clause. It also included a confession of judgment, a legal document stating that if they ever defaulted on the payments, I could immediately obtain a judgment against them for the remaining amount without a full trial. There would be no escape. To meet the first substantial down payment, my parents had to take out a second mortgage on their house, the very house they had used my money to improve. The irony was not lost on me. The subsequent monthly payments were significant, forcing them into a lifestyle far more modest than the one they had flaunted for decades. The lavish parties stopped. The designer clothes disappeared. My mother had to take on more clients, less glamorous ones, just to make ends meet. My father, with the threat of professional ruin hanging over him, had to work harder than ever. The fallout within the family was seismic. Ethan was furious with me. He called me once, screaming that I had ruined their lives, that I was a cold, heartless snake. He couldn't seem to grasp that their lives had been a facade built on deceit. When he realized that their financial support for him had been cut off completely, his anger turned to desperation. His tech startup, it turned out, was more sizzle than steak, and without their constant cash infusions, it began to crumble. The last I heard, he had been forced to sell his condo and move into a small apartment. We no longer speak. My relationship with my parents is non-existent. They make their monthly payments to a designated account via electronic transfer. There are no phone calls, no holiday cards, no birthday wishes. The silence is a relief. They are no longer my family. They are a financial obligation on a balance sheet. The single dollar bill from my birthday card sits framed on my desk, a reminder not of the insult, but of the moment my life changed for the better. It was the catalyst that forced me to see the truth and empowered me to act on it. Aunt Clara remains my rock. She was horrified when I told her the full extent of their deception, but fiercely proud of how I handled it. "You used your greatest strength, your mind, to fight back," she told me. "Your grandfather would have been immensely proud. You protected his legacy." Our relationship has only deepened, and she has become the true maternal figure in my life. With the settlement money, I didn't go on a spending spree. That wouldn't be me. The first thing I did was pay off the last of my real student loans, freeing myself from the only remaining debt to my name. The rest I invested wisely, creating a diverse portfolio that will secure my future, a future built not on a stolen inheritance, but on one I reclaimed through my own intelligence and courage. I finally bought that condo I had been saving for in a beautiful building with a view of the city skyline. It's a space that is entirely mine, paid for with money that is rightfully mine. Sometimes, when I'm working on a particularly complex case, tracing money through tangled webs of lies, I think of my family. I realize now that my upbringing, as painful as it was, prepared me for my career in a way I never could have imagined. I learned from a young age that the most pristine-looking accounts can hide the ugliest secrets. My job is to find the truth, and I am exceptionally good at it. The other day, a junior accountant at my firm was feeling discouraged after a setback. I found her staring at a seemingly impenetrable spreadsheet. I walked over and offered her a piece of advice. "Don't get emotional," I told her. "The numbers don't care about your feelings. They only care about the truth. Just keep digging. The truth is always there, waiting to be found. You just have to be brave enough to look at it and strong enough to know what to do with it when you find it." It was advice I had learned the hard way. I had looked at the ugly truth of my own life, and I had found the strength to act. I had balanced the books, closed the ledger, and in doing so, I hadn't just reclaimed my money. I had reclaimed my life. I was finally building a future on my own terms, funded by my own hard work and defined not by their lies, but by my own truth.